Hello, my name is Andy Bauer. I'm going to be giving an introduction and two examples using the seed lot selection tool. This tool can assist land managers with reforestation efforts by helping to identify appropriate seed sources for a reforestation site or help them to determine where to deploy their available seed inventory considering future climates. The seed lot selection tool is built to support both assisted population migration and possibly assisted range expansion with the objective that seedlings be adapted to future climates. If you're interested in a general description of assisted migration, check out this Climate Hub webpage on the topic. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you two scenarios from the Seed Lot Selection Tool guidebook to get you familiar with the tool. The scenarios in the guidebook and user tips focus on the Pacific Northwest region of the National Forest System, as well as national and regional Forest Service policy as of June 2022. After this tutorial, I encourage you to check out the SST guidebook for additional scenarios and some basic information about account creation and saving your runs. This video tutorial and the guidebook are intended to help Region 6 silviculturists to get started, but they should still work with their zone geneticists to develop and design reforestation plans. Here you can see the Seed Lot Selection Tool website with the map zoomed in to Region 6. There are 4 tabs on the left-hand side here. The first tab is the About tab, and it shows the steps that you would go through to use the Seed Lot Selection Tool, steps 1 through 7. In order to do a run, we're going to select the Tool tab here. And first I'm going to show you how to navigate the map. This is helpful if I don't have the latitude and longitude associated with a specific site. I can navigate around the map by grabbing and dragging the map. I can zoom in and out using either your scrolling wheel or the buttons here on the side. I can also click on a point, and if I click on that point, it shows the latitude and longitude and the elevation, and then all of the different seed zones that point falls into. And then I can select an area by clicking on this set point bar here. So let's walk through the first example, which is to find seed lots for a planting site. In this scenario, I'm using a real-world example that's in the guidebook. We'll be finding seed lots to replant an area outside of Estacada, Oregon, which was burned in the Riverside Fire in 2020. So first, I'm going to check the box in step 1 that says find seed lots. And since I know the source location that I want to use here, I can enter that latitude and longitude here in the box. So I'm going to enter that 45.2211 and longitude minus 121.9755. And don't forget to include the negative sign there. We'll need that. And then if I hit enter, you can see that the elevation of that location is automatically populated, and this pointer here shows where that location is on the map. I can close this pop-up box here with this X in the upper right-hand corner. Now, in step 3, is for selecting a region. And this is mainly for computing purposes. The Seed Lot Selection Tool works for the majority of North America. And by selecting a particular region, it limits the data as analyzed to just portions of North America. We're just going to leave this as automatic, which will analyze the data only from the western region of North America. And in the exercises I'll cover, I'm staying only within this western region, so there's no need to change this setting. Now in step 4, I need to select the climate scenarios that the seed lots are adapted to. So I'm going to leave the first box here, the climate that seed lots are adapted to the 1961 to 1990 time period. And that 30-year time period is the climatic normal averaged over that 30-year period for the climate variables that will be selected in a later step. Now, I'm using the 1961 to 1990 time period because it's typically assumed that past climate has the greatest influence on inherited traits like survival, growth, and reproduction of the seed lot's parents. And this is the time period prior to any appreciable warming that has happened. And this would be the climate that those seedlot parents would have been adapted to. Now, for the time period for when the trees should be best adapted to for this planting site, I'm going to select the 2011 to 2040 time period. Currently, it's 2022, and we're in the middle of this time period. So the climate data for this time period is modeled data for this future time period. And it represents climate change that has already happened. You can see here there is a box for the RCP, or the representative concentration pathway. In this drop-down menu, there are two choices, and I'm going to select the RCP 8.5, which is the higher emissions scenario. Now, the reason why it's recommended to use the RCP 8.5 is because this RCP has a faster and higher temperature increase. Now, it's possible that this may overestimate the actual climate change, but for planning purposes, it's better to overestimate than to underestimate. If we don't plan for enough climate change, then we may end up with trees that are maladapted in the future. But one consideration when using this RCP 8.5 is to take care to not move seed sources too far from warm to cold climates, which could potentially end up with seedlings being damaged by cold early in their life because they're not adapted to the current temperatures, the temperatures now when those seedlings are planted. So using the seedlot selection tool helps to reduce the risk of cold damage by staying within a transfer limit, which is in the next step. For selecting the transfer limit method in step 5, you can see that there are several options in the seedlot selection tool. For example, you can select the zone method, and now you see that you have the option of choosing a species, and there are several species that are preloaded, and also different zones. There's the Oregon and Washington historic zones, our Forest Service breeding zones, and provisional seed zones for native plants. And if we select the Forest Service generic breeding zone, we can see that this location is in breeding zone 06015, which is elevations that are above 4,000 feet. And these are shown on the map in the areas in light green. Now, for this example, though, we are going to use the custom method. So I select custom. In step 6, we're going to select the climate variables. The seedlot selection tool has many options of climate variables to choose from. If you click on the drop-down menu, you can see that there's a whole suite of climate variables that you can choose. So you can set specific variables if you know that those variables are important to the species you're working with. But you will want to use empirical evidence to support using particular climate variables for certain species of interest. If you don't know which climate variables to choose, then the recommendation is to just click the Choose Automatically button, which is what we're going to do for this exercise. When you select this Choose Automatically button, the default variables that are selected are mean coldest month temperature, which is basically winter temperature, and summer heat moisture index, which is a measure of summer aridity, and it incorporates the mean summer rainfall and temperature. Now, for each climate variable, there's a center and a transfer limit. The center is the value of that climate variable at this specifically chosen location. And the transfer limit determines how far climatically a seedlot can be moved and still have an acceptable level of adaptation to that climate. In other words, the transfer limit is the range around the center value. For example, the center for mean coldest month temperature is 0.1 degrees C. And the transfer limit is plus or minus 2 degrees C, which is the default for custom transfer limit methods. Under the custom option, transfer limits can be adjusted by selecting the limits here, but I suggest using the default or letting empirical evidence inform adjustments. Now that we see the climate data, I want to jump back to the time periods. The value here for the climate variables that's being displayed is the modeled value for this time period. If we were to change this time period back to 1961 to 1990, we can see that the center of this variable is negative 1.3 degrees C. And this is actual climate data from that 30-year time period. And if we were to select this 1981 to 2010 period, which is also actual data from that period, we can see that the mean coldest month temperature now has increased from negative 1.3 to negative 0.5 degrees. That's showing change that has already happened. Now, for this example, we're starting off using the 2011 to 2040 time period with this RCP 8.5, and now you can see that the value for mean coldest month temperature has increased even more to 0.1 degrees. So again, this time period takes into account climate change that has already happened. In step 7, we have the ability to apply constraints. The tool allows you to constrain by either geographic area or a species range. And when using this option, the tool will only show areas of climate match within those constraints applied. But in this case, we're not going to use any constraints in this option. In step 8, then we click on Run Tool. And it takes a short time for the processing. And then the output is displayed on the map. So after processing is complete, we now see the map with these orange colored areas. And these colored areas fall within the previously selected transfer limits. And the darker red, orange the color, the closer the match. And as you move into the lighter areas, lighter colors and lighter yellows, the match decreases. So this is a basic risk assessment. The higher the match, the closer the seed lot matches the chosen climate. So higher matches will have a lower risk of not being adapted to that chosen climate. If we zoom in on this location, we zoom in as close as we can go, we can already see that for this location, if we happen to collect seed from trees on this site, let's say the year before it burned in that Riverside fire, that seed from that specific site is now actually no longer best fit for this location based on the climate that those trees were adapted to when they became established. And looking at the map, you can see that the darker red colors tend to be in the lower elevations. Since temperatures have increased due to climate change, the suitable seed lots for this location are now found at lower elevations or in areas to the south of this site. These areas to the south, if we zoom out, these are trees that are going to be adapted to higher temperatures. If we zoom way out, we can see that there is a lot of area to the south that is a good match. If we change to look at, say, the mid-century, so we choose the 2040 to 2070 time period, we select that. Now you can see that the value of mean coldest month temperature has increased from 0.1 to 1.2 degrees. So winter temperature has warmed and the summer heat moisture index has also changed. So now let's see how the output looks if we leave everything else the same, and we're going to run the tool and see how the mapped output looks. That takes just a little bit to be displayed. So now we can see that we have to go even further away from the planting site to find seed that will be suitable for the climate at that site. And generally you have to go even lower in elevation or even further to the south, but at a similar elevation. So our general recommendation is to use this mid-century time period for planting seed deployment, because there's a good chance that planting for a mid-century climate, you'll be able to find seed lots that are still suitable today. It means that the seedlings will have a good chance to survive that really crucial but vulnerable seedling stage, and hopefully won't be killed by a late spring frost, for example. But they'll also be adapted to the mid-century climate too. If I plan too far out to the end of the century, if I was to choose this 2071 to 2100 time period, I could risk selecting seed lots that are adapted to a much warmer climate than the current climate. And those seed lots potentially could sustain cold damage in the current time period, right now, especially during that vulnerable seedling stage. So we need to make sure we're selecting seed lots that are adapted to both now and into the future. And using that mid-century time period, generally, the rate of change is such that if we're looking at the mid-century, it's still within the 2-degree transfer limit, both currently and towards the end of the century. If we want to try and define the actual seed lots to use, what we can do is use this map and click on areas that show the darkest red color. For example, if we click here, and we just click once, don't click the set point button, and we look for the USFS generic breeding zone, we can see that this location here is in the 18023 breeding zone. So that is a seed lot from the Willamette National Forest in the 3,000 to 4,000 foot elevation band. And if we close that, we could look down here and maybe click on this area here. And now this is a generic breeding zone 15014. So this would be an Umpqua National Forest breeding zone from the 3,500 to 4,500 foot elevation band. But let's say we clicked on a site up here in this dark red. Here, this is generic breeding zone 06013. So this is a Mount Hood National Forest breeding zone from the 2,000 to 3,000 foot elevation. General rule of thumb, I'd say, is that we're looking for sites that are a climatic match, but it's always better to select sites that are also closest geographically. So this area here would probably be the most preferable. So now we know that the 06013 breeding zone, and we can look in our seed inventory to see if there's seed from that breeding zone in inventory, and that would be a good seed lot to use for this planting site. So now if we want to compare several seed lots, what I can do is click on this window down here, and then we click on the Add Seed Lot button here. And you can either enter the location of a seed lot with the latitude and longitude, or you could click on the location. But for the example of scenario 1 in the guidebook, we already have some locations identified. So I'm going to enter those manually. So the first one, I got 44.52. And the latitude minus 122.10. And I'm just going to name that site 1. And I click the Add button. And I'm going to add 3 seed lots. So I click the Add Seed Lot button again. 45.00 minus 122.10. I'm going to call that site 2. Click Add. Add a third seed lot, 4.13 minus 121.97. I'm going to call that site 3. And we can use these buttons here to increase the size of this window here. We can either maximize it or minimize it. Now you can see that each of these seed lots that I added show up as blue dots here on the map. And if we open this up, you can see that by hovering over site 2, that dot turns yellow. So that would be the site 2. And here the yellow one is site 1. What we want to do is we want to look at the climatic match for these sites. So we're going to leave all of the settings for the tool as is and just click Run Tool again. You can see that the tool has calculated the percentage match, and then it also shows the difference in these climate variables from the site. So if we maximize this, we can see that site 1 here is a 62% match, site 2 is a 36% match, site 3 is a 57% match. So of these 3 seed lots, this one here for site 1 would be the best choice. So even though this site here is geographically closer, that's site 2, it's only a 36% match. So this would indicate that this seed lot here would be a better match. Now we can see how things will change moving further into the future. We changed this to the 2070 to 2100 time period at the end of the century, and we click Run Tool again. You can see the climatic match, and we can see that the winter temperatures increased even more, and we would have to go even further down in elevation, almost to the floor of the Willamette Valley or further south, to find a good climatic match. And if we look at those seed lots, we can see that none of them are actually a good climatic match for the end of the century. So we would get rid of these and then use the map again to try to find locations that would be suitable seed sources. Now I'm going to shift to scenario 2, which is identifying suitable planting locations for a particular seed lot. And I'm going to be using the location of a single seed lot where a seed was collected from a known location. I'm going to get rid of these seed lots that I had added. And the first thing I need to do is go back to step 1 and change my objective to find planting sites. So for this example, I'm going to pretend that the seed lot that we're trying to find a planting site for was collected from the same location as I was using as the actual planting site for the first example. So I'm keeping the latitude and longitude the same. So again, I'm going to use the 1961 to 1990 time period, the time period from when the seed lots are adapted to, because these seed lots were collected from parent trees that were adapted to this climate. And again, I'm going to look at that current 2011 to 2040 time period because we're looking at planting right now. Now I'm going to use the zone method here. And because we know that the seed was collected from a specific location, I'm going to use the value at the selected location here. If we just had a seed lot that had been collected from multiple locations across the seed zone, as many of the seed lots in our Forest Service seed inventory are only identified just to the zone level, in that case, you would want to click on this button to use the climatic center of the zone. But since we're pretending that this seed all came from one location, we're using the value at the selected location. I'm using the generic seed zone and our Forest Service breeding zone. And the reason that I'm using generic here and not Douglas fir species specific is because the Mount Hood National Forest doesn't have species specific zones delineated. If we select Douglas fir, we can see that there's only the Oregon zone available. So we're going to go back to generic and select our Forest Service breeding zone. So now we can see that the climate variables have changed again because I'm looking at that climate from where the seed came from. That is the climate from the 1961 to 1990 time period. That's the climate that this seed is adapted to. Now I'm going to leave everything else the same and click the Run tool again. With the output mapped in the tool, I can see that this seed collected from my site is going to be suitable for locations higher in elevation or generally further to the north. Some to the south, but these ones to the south are at higher elevations. If I want to compare a couple of different planting sites, I'll click on the Add Planting Sites, and then I can click the Add Planting Site button, just like I did in the previous example. And again, I have some locations selected, so I'm going to enter those manually. Otherwise, I could just click on the map to add sites. Got 45.32, longitude 1.72, and I'm going to call this site 1. Add a second. Call that site 2. And third, finally, 5. And I will call that site 3. So now I have the 3 planting sites on the map. And if I zoom in here, I can see that they all fall into areas that are pretty good matches. And again, if I leave everything, all the settings the same, and I click Run Tool, I'll be able to get the match percentages and the differences in the climate variables. So now I can see that site 1 is a 93% match, site 2 is a 49% match, site 3 is a 64% match. So this site 1, and here as I hover over it, you can see it turns yellow. So that's a location on the south side of Mount Hood. Now, one thing I want to point out is that using the zone method, this transfer limit is quite wide, 3.75 degrees, which is more than the 2 degrees that we recommend for transfer as far as temperature. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to edit the transfer limits. You do that by clicking on that, the number, and then enter the value you want. I'm going to change the summer heat moisture index to 18.6. And now I'm going to run the tool again, and let's take notice of the output mapped from the model. So we'll click Run Tool. So you can see the coloring on the map looks quite a bit different, and that's because we've shrunk the range of what we are considering suitable climate. An important point is that the darkest red areas don't change. Those areas that are dark red still stay dark red, but the width of the total area colored shrinks. You can see there's a lot less of the lighter orange and yellow. And if we look at the climatic match, those numbers also change because, again, we've constrained the area that we're considering suitable. So now if we change the future time period to the mid-century, we leave everything else as is, click Run Tool again. Again, we see both the output changes of the coloring on the map. But if we look at those match percentages, now site 1 is only a 31% match. Site 2 and site 3 are a 0% match. And if we were to look all the way out at the end of the century and run the tool again, now we see that all 3 of these sites are 0% match. And if we look at the map and we zoom out to see where the climatic match occurs, we can see that it's all the way up here in the North Cascades towards the end of the century. So we step back to the 2041 to 2070 time period, because remember I said that we recommend aiming for that mid-century. And we run the tool, we can see that the locations that would be a good match for that seed lot collected down here on the Mount Hood would be some of these areas up here in the central and northern Washington Cascades. So these are examples of how to use the seed lot selection tool for its 2 main purposes. Number 1, trying to find the location of seed lots for a chosen planting site, or 2, trying to find suitable planting sites for a seed lot that we have in our seed inventory. In this case, it was from a known location. And this tool is meant to support silviculturists to include climate change information while also using their expertise, knowledge of the site, and working with their zone geneticist. So please check out the Seed Lot Selection Tool Guidebook for additional scenarios and user tips, and review these examples on your own. And for more information, there is a recent publication in the journal Ecosphere that reviews the Seed Lot Selection Tool and provides some other case studies. Thank you.